The morning light filtered through thin curtains as Mei Lin opened her eyes. Another day of carefully measured words, or rather, the absence of them. She stared at the ceiling, counting the familiar cracks that branched like rivers on a map. 5 minutes until her alarm would ring. 5 minutes of peace before she needed to put on her invisible armor. May's room was neat and organized, much like her thoughts. Books lined up by size on the shelf, colored pencils arranged by shade in their tin case, a desk where not a single paper dared to overlap another. The only item that seemed out of place was a small music box her grandmother had given her when she was 6. It played only the first few notes of a lullaby before the mechanism would catch, as if the song itself was hesitant to break the silence. Downstairs, she could hear her father clearing his throat, a sound that carried through the old house like thunder. Professor Chen expected punctuality, excellence, and above all, respect, which in their household meant speaking only when necessary, and necessary meant important, and important was defined solely by him. When her alarm finally buzzed, Mei silenced it with a quick tap. She dressed in the outfit she'd prepared the night before, navy blue pants, a white collared shirt, and a gray sweater. Clothes that helped her blend into the background, becoming part of the school's walls and lockers rather than drawing any attention. "Good morning," her father said without looking up from his newspaper when she entered the kitchen. His coffee steamed beside a half-eaten piece of toast, and papers from the university where he taught were spread across the table. "Morning," Mei whispered, the word barely escaping her lips. 2 syllables. That counted as participation in morning conversation. Her mother stood by the stove, her movements efficient as she slid an egg onto a plate. "Eat quickly," she said with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "The bus comes in 15 minutes. Once, when Mei was younger, her mother had been different, laughing more easily, speaking with animation about her work as a translator. But years of living with Professor Chen had worn away those edges, smoothing her into someone who now translated her husband's moods instead of languages. Mei ate her breakfast in small, careful bites. 17 chews per mouthful, just like every day. Her father's pen scratched across student papers, the sound sharp in the kitchen's quiet. Her mother wiped counters that were already clean. "Your math test is today, correct?" her father asked suddenly. Mei nodded, then remembered the rule. "Yes, I expect nothing less than excellence. You've studied sufficiently?" Another nod, then, "Yes." The conversation, if it could be called that, ended there. 3 words from her, a normal breakfast exchange. The bus horn honked outside, and Mei gathered her backpack, lunchbox, and jacket with practiced efficiency. Her mother's hand brushed her shoulder as she passed, a ghost of affection. There and gone in a moment. The school bus was already half full when Mei climbed aboard. She walked past rows of students without meeting anyone's eyes, finding her usual spot near the back. The seat next to her remained empty, as it had for the past 3 years. Not because anyone disliked her, dislike would require noticing, but because her silence created an invisible force field that most teenagers instinctively avoided. Through the window, houses slipped by like scenes from other people's stories. Mei wondered what mornings looked like behind those walls. Were there families that filled their kitchens with conversation? Did other 16-year-olds wake up ready to share their thoughts, their dreams, their fears? It hadn't always been this way for Mei. There had been a time in early elementary school when she'd spoken more freely. Not a chatterbox, never that. But she'd answered questions in class, had a few friends, even performed in a 2nd grade, play as a tree, a role with exactly 2 lines that she'd practiced for weeks. The change had come gradually after her father received tenure and his expectations for the family's reputation intensified. Every small correction, "Speak clearly." "Mei, that opinion shows ignorance of the facts. If you have nothing substantial to contribute, it's better to listen," had stacked like bricks, building a wall between her and her voice. By middle school, her teachers had labeled her pathologically shy. Her father had dismissed the school counselor's concerns with academic flourish, citing cultural differences in the virtue of listening over speaking. Her mother had nodded along, her own voice having grown quieter over the years. The bus pulled up to Westridge High School, a sprawling brick building that housed just under 2,000 students. Mei waited until most had exited before standing to leave, timing her entry into the hallway traffic to minimize any chance of interaction. First period was literature, normally May's favorite subject. Today, however, Mr. Winters was organizing debates on their current novel, which meant potential disaster. "We'll be discussing the protagonist's moral choices," Mr. Winters announced, his bow tie slightly crooked as always. "I've assigned partners for the debate. When I call your names, please move to sit together." May's stomach tightened as names were paired off. Please not me, she thought, though she knew the odds weren't in her favor. Maylin and Daphne Park. Daphne, a girl with bright red hair and confidence that radiated like sunlight, turned in her seat, scanning the room until she located May. Her face showed no disappointment, just curiosity, which was somehow worse. Disappointment would have been honest. As May gathered her books to move, Mr. Winters added, "Remember, participation in the debate counts for 30% of your grade this quarter." The weight of those words pressed on May's chest as she slid into the seat beside Daphne. 30%. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Excellence is the only acceptable outcome." "Hi," Daphne said, her voice bright and quick. "I've seen you around, but I don't think we've ever actually talked, have we? I'm in your algebra class too, but I sit up front because my eyesight is terrible. Do you want to argue for or against the protagonist? I'm fine either way." The rush of words was overwhelming. May stared at her notebook, tracing the spiral binding with her finger. One word. She just needed to produce one word to start. "Against," she finally whispered. Daphne nodded, apparently unfazed by the delayed response. "Cool, that works. I was leaning that way too. So we think his decision was wrong because..." She let the question hang, giving May space to contribute. The silence stretched between them, growing heavier with each second. May's thoughts raced. She had opinions, strong ones, about the character's selfish choices, but translating those thoughts into spoken words felt like trying to lift a boulder. "Maybe," May started, her voice so soft that Daphne had to lean closer, "because he only thought about himself, not how it affected others." 6 words, then 9. 15 total. More than she'd spoken aloud to anyone outside her family in months. Her heart pounded as if she'd run a mile. Daphne smiled, not the pitying smile May had come to dread, but one of genuine agreement. "Exactly." He was totally self-centered, and we can point to at least 3 scenes where he had the chance to consider other perspectives but didn't. The debate preparation continued, with Daphne carrying most of the conversation, but carefully creating openings for May's whispered contributions. By the end of class, they had a solid outline, and May had spoken perhaps 30 words total, a marathon by her standards. As the bell rang, Daphne turned to her. "You have good ideas. You should share them more." The compliment felt both warming and terrifying. May managed a slight nod before gathering her things and slipping into the hallway current. The rest of the morning passed in May's usual routine of strategic invisibility. In history, she sat in the 3rd row, close enough to see the board but far enough from the front to avoid being called on. In chemistry lab, she partnered with Lee, a boy as quiet as herself, their entire collaboration conducted through nods and gestures, the occasional written note. Lunchtime loomed like a treacherous sea. The cafeteria, with its unstructured social time and constant noise, was May's daily nightmare. 3 years ago, she'd tried eating in bathroom stalls, but a teacher had caught her and called home, resulting in one of her father's rare but searing lectures on propriety and reputation. Now she had a system. She would get her food quickly, find an empty spot at the end of a table occupied by students too absorbed in their own conversations to notice her, eat methodically while reading a book, and leave with 10 minutes to spare, enough time to visit the library before afternoon classes. Today, however, her system failed. Her usual table was fully occupied by the debate team, practicing for an upcoming competition. As May stood with her tray scanning for alternatives, panic began to flutter in her chest. Nowhere to disappear to, nowhere to... "May! Over here!" Daphne's voice cut through the cafeteria noise, drawing unwanted attention. She was waving from a table near the windows. Surrounded by friends May recognized as being from the arts programs, drama, band chorus. Every instinct told May to turn away, to find a corner, a stairwell, anywhere but there. But some tiny voice, perhaps the same one that had managed 15 words in literature class, pushed her forward. She approached the table like someone walking into the ocean, cautiously, ready to retreat at the first sign of danger. Daphne scooted over, making space on the bench. "Everyone, this is Maylin, my debate partner for Winter's class. May, this is everyone. Faces turned toward her. Names were said that immediately evaporated from May's memory as blood rushed in her ears. She sat, eyes fixed on her lunch tray, waiting for the suffocating pressure of attention to pass. To her surprise, after brief hellos, the group returned to their previous conversations. No one demanded she introduce herself further or questioned her presence. She was simply allowed to exist in their circle without expectation. As conversations flowed around her, discussions about the spring musical, complaints about calculus homework, plans for weekend movie marathons, May ate her lunch in silence. But for the first time in years, it was a silence she had chosen, not one forced upon her by circumstance or expectation. The difference was subtle but profound, like the distinction between holding your breath and the natural pause between exhale and inhale. The girl who remained quiet all her life sat among noise and chatter, still silent, still watching. But inside her mind something was shifting, the faintest hint that perhaps someday she might have something to say. And perhaps when that day came, her voice would be worth hearing. 3 weeks after the literature debate, May sat in Ms. Rivera's office staring at the potted fern beside the counselor's desk, rather than meeting her eyes. The plant's fronds drooped slightly, reaching toward the patch of sunlight from the window. I understood the feeling. Your teachers are concerned, Ms. Rivera said, her voice gentle but direct, particularly after what happened in your history presentation yesterday. May's cheeks burned at the memory. Standing before 27 pairs of eyes, her carefully prepared note cards trembling in her hands, her voice had simply vanished. 30 seconds of silence that felt like 30 years. Then tears she couldn't control. Then a hasty retreat to the bathroom where she'd hidden until the next period. Your written work shows tremendous insight. May, your teachers know you're capable. Ms. Rivera leaned forward, trying to catch May's downcast eyes. But participation is part of your grade and, more importantly, part of preparing for college and beyond. College. The word her father worked into every conversation at home. The future that loomed like a storm on the horizon. I'm going to suggest something a little different, Ms. Rivera continued, turning to her computer. Instead of traditional study hall this semester, I'm assigning you to music room assistance during 4th period. May's head jerked up. But I don't... 2 words escaped before her voice clamped shut again. Play an instrument? Ms. Rivera smiled. That's not a requirement. Mr. Cato could use help organizing the music library and preparing for the spring concert. It's quiet work away from the spotlight, and it might be good for you to engage with a different part of school life. May wanted to explain that her father would never approve of anything that took time away from academic subjects, that assistance wouldn't look good on college applications, that she knew nothing about music. But as always, the words remained trapped, so she simply nodded. Excellent. You'll start tomorrow. Ms. Rivera made a note in her file. And May? This isn't a punishment. Think of it as an opportunity. The next day, May stood outside the music room door gathering courage. Inside, she could hear the muffled sounds of a saxophone repeating the same phrase over and over, each iteration slightly different. She checked her watch, already 3 minutes late. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Punctuality demonstrates respect for others' time. She pushed the door open and slipped inside, trying to be invisible. The room was larger than she'd imagined, with tiered semicircle seating facing a conductor's podium. Instrument cases lined the walls, and posters of famous composers and jazz musicians covered any remaining space. A boy she vaguely recognized from sophomore year was practicing in the corner, too absorbed in his saxophone to notice her entrance. Ah, you must be May. She turned to find an older man emerging from what appeared to be a storage closet, his arms full of sheet music. His hair was more salt than pepper, wild enough to suggest he ran his hands through it often, and his cardigan had seen better decades. I'm Mr. Cato. You can put your things over there. He nodded toward a desk near the piano. I'm trying to organize these arrangements by difficulty level. But some mischievous soul. He glanced pointedly at the saxophone player, who grinned without stopping his practice. Mixed them all up last semester. For the next 45 minutes, Mee sorted music into piles based on Mr. Cato's system. The work was straightforward, almost soothing in its simplicity. As she handled each piece, she found herself studying the notes on the page, fascinated by their patterns even though she couldn't read music. The saxophone player eventually packed up his instrument and left with a casual wave. Other students drifted in and out, some practicing during their free periods, others dropping off instruments or picking up music. Mr. Cato moved through the room like a friendly whirlwind, offering advice here, tuning a violin there, all while humming fragments of melodies under his breath. No one expected May to speak. No one stared when she entered the room. By week's end, the music room had become a sanctuary. On Monday of the second week, she arrived to find the room empty. A note on the desk read, "May, faculty meeting. Please continue sorting the junior band selections. Back in 30 minutes." The silence felt different than the silence of her bedroom, or the strained quiet of the dinner table at home. This silence seemed alive somehow, expectant, as if the instruments lining the walls were holding their breath. May moved through her assigned task methodically, but her eyes kept drifting to the grand piano that occupied the far corner of the room. Unlike the worn upright pushed against the wall that students used for practice, this piano gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its lid propped open to reveal the complex machinery inside. When the last sheet of music was placed in its proper folder, May glanced at the clock. 20 minutes before Mr. Cato would return. 20 minutes alone in a room she had come to trust. Almost without conscious decision, she found herself standing beside the grand piano. Her finger hovered over a white key near the middle, trembling slightly before pressing down with the gentlest of touches. The note rang out, clear and pure. Somehow she knew its name without being told. She pressed another key, E, then G. The three notes together created a sound that seemed to resonate not just in the room but inside her chest, as if her ribcage had become an extension of the piano's soundboard. May looked around guiltily, but the room remained empty. She sat tentatively on the bench, her posture mimicking what she'd seen in movies. Back straight, hands curved, feet reaching for pedals she didn't understand. Without any training, without any plan, she began to play. Not a song, not anything recognizable, just notes that felt right to her fingers, that sounded like the feelings she carried inside. Discordant at times, stumbling, searching, but occasionally finding combinations that made her breath catch, that seemed to speak in a language she'd always known but never used. Time disappeared. The world narrowed to the feeling of cool keys beneath her fingertips, the way each note vibrated through the wooden floor into her feet, the discovery that pressing harder or softer changed not just the volume, but the character of the sound. "You have good instincts." Mr. Cato's voice should have startled her, should have sent her running in embarrassment. Instead, May's hands remained on the keys, the last notes fading between them. Most beginners bang away trying to be loud. He stayed by the door, giving her space. "You're listening to the instrument." May slowly withdrew her hands, folding them in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. Mr. Cato shook his head. "The piano doesn't mind." "Neither do I." He approached, but instead of taking the bench, he reached past her to play a simple sequence of notes, the same three May had started with, but arranged in a pattern that created a haunting, incomplete phrase. Without thinking, May played the notes back to him, adding a fourth that somehow completed the musical thought. Mr. Cato's eyebrows rose. "Perfect pitch," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then louder, "Would you like to learn?" The question hung in the air between them. May stared at the black and white keys, thinking of her father's expectations, her carefully planned academic schedule, the weight of college applications looming next year. Then she thought of the feeling that had coursed through her while playing, the strange sense that her hands were speaking a language her voice never could. She nodded once, the movement so small it was barely perceptible. "Excellent," Mr. Cato said, as if they'd just concluded a lengthy conversation. "We'll start with proper hand position tomorrow." The next day, May found a beginner's piano book on the bench, open to a simple exercise. No verbal instructions, no awkward questions, just music waiting for her. Mr. Cato worked across the room, seemingly focused on inventory, but she noticed how he tilted his head to listen when she practiced. Their unusual arrangement continued through February and into March. Each day, May would find the book open to a new page, occasionally with notes penciled in the margins, slower here, or try with eyes closed. She never asked questions aloud, but would sometimes circle a notation she didn't understand, finding it explained the next day. At home, nothing changed. Her father continued to quiz her about academic subjects over dinner. Her mother continued to move quietly through the house like a shadow. May continued to speak only when necessary, her daily word count rarely exceeding 50. But in her mind, something was transforming. She began to hear music everywhere, in the rhythm of the bus engine, in the cadence of teachers' lectures, in the rise and fall of cafeteria conversations. Her fingers would twitch during math class, practicing scales beneath her desk. At night, she would press her hands against her bedroom wall, feeling phantom keys beneath her fingertips as she played silent melodies in the dark. One afternoon in late March, May arrived at the music room to find it unusually crowded. The jazz band had an unscheduled rehearsal due to an upcoming competition, meaning her usual piano time would be impossible. Disappointment must have shown on her face because Mr. Cato appeared beside her, jangling a set of keys. "Room 103 is empty until 4, he said quietly. "There's an old upright in there that no one uses anymore. Not as nice as ours, but the tuner came last month, so it should be decent." May took the keys with a nod of thanks, slipping out of the music room and down the emptying hallway to room 103, a former music classroom now used mainly for storage. True to Mr. Cato's word, an upright piano stood against the far wall, its wood dark with age, its brass pedals worn from generations of feet. The room smelled of dust and forgotten things. Stacked chairs created a maze she navigated carefully, finally reaching the piano and running her fingers lightly over its closed lid. When she lifted the cover and pressed a key, the sound was different from the grand piano, warmer somehow, with a mellowness that spoke of decades of use. This piano had history, had been played by countless hands before hers. Somehow that made it less intimidating. May placed the book Mr. Cato had given her on the stand, Bach's simple minuets that she'd been practicing for weeks. But instead of opening it, she let her hands find their own path across the keys. The melody that emerged was halting at first, uncertain, but gradually took shape into something that felt like her own voice, a voice that had been waiting all these years for the right instrument to make it heard. And in that dusty, forgotten classroom, surrounded by the ghosts of music past, Maylin began to speak. By the time spring bloomed across the school grounds, May had developed a routine that felt like breathing. Every morning, wake, dress, minimize her presence at breakfast, endure classes. Every afternoon, slip into room 103, lose herself in the piano for exactly 47 minutes, then hurry to catch the late bus home. Every evening, homework, dinner with minimal speaking, more homework, bed. What changed wasn't the structure of her days, but the texture of her thoughts. Where once her mind had been filled with anxiety and careful calculation, how to avoid being called on, how to deflect attention, how many words she'd spoken versus how many were expected. Now music flowed through the spaces between these worries. Melodies followed her through the hallways. Harmonies wove through her dreams at night. On a rainy Tuesday in April, May arrived at room 103 to find a stack of books beside the piano, topped with a handwritten note. "These might interest you. No rush to return them." Like the books ranged from basic music theory to the biographies of famous composers. May ran her fingers over their covers, feeling as if she'd been handed keys to doors she hadn't known existed. That afternoon, instead of playing, she curled up on the piano bench and dove into the first theory book, absorbing concepts of scales, chords, and progressions with the same intensity she usually reserved for advanced calculus. The following week, Mr. Cato asked casually as she was leaving the main music room, "Did you have any questions about those books?" May hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her notebook, a list of questions she'd written down while reading, each one precisely formulated to require the most information with the fewest words. Mr. Cato studied the list, nodding slowly. Good questions, complex ones. He glanced up at her with eyes that seemed to understand far more than she'd written. Would it be easier to discuss these while playing? It was a gift. This understanding that some conversations could happen through music rather than words. That afternoon in room 103, Mr. Cato demonstrated concepts from her questions by playing them, inviting her to echo or modify what she heard. Their dialogue of notes replaced the need for lengthy explanations, creating a language that felt more natural to May than any spoken tongue. As May approached, bringing with it the pressure of final exams and her father's increasingly frequent discussions about summer academic programs, May found herself drawn deeper into the world Mr. Cato had opened for her. She borrowed more books, filling the margins with tiny notes. She practiced until her fingers ached, then practiced more, working through exercises with the same methodical determination she applied to mathematics. One afternoon, frustrated by a particularly difficult Bach piece, May found herself improvising, changing notes, shifting rhythms, transforming the structured composition into something that expressed her own tangled emotions. The result wasn't Bach anymore, but it wasn't exactly May either. It was something new, something between them. She stopped abruptly when she realized what she was doing, feeling as if she'd committed some musical sacrilege. But the next day she found a new book waiting for her, Introduction to Composition. Inside the front cover, Mr. Cato had written, "Some rules exist to be followed. Others exist so we can understand why we're breaking them." That summer, while other teenagers worked at mall jobs or lounged by pools, May told her parents she was taking a music theory course at the community college. A half-truth that gave her 3 precious hours every Tuesday and Thursday in practice rooms with real grand pianos. Her father approved only after confirming that several prestigious universities offered music, minors that would provide a well-rounded application profile. What May didn't tell them was that she was also composing. Simple pieces at first, 16 or 20 measures that captured a single feeling or moment. Later, more complex works that wove multiple themes together, that built tension and released it in ways that made her chest tighten with the pure joy of creation. When school resumed in the fall, May returned to room 103 like someone coming home after a long journey. The old upright greeted her with its familiar warm tone, slightly out of tune after the summer heat but still hers. Mr. Cato, his hair now entirely silver, welcomed her to the music room with a nod that acknowledged everything she'd accomplished without requiring her to speak of it. He listened to her play, really listened, then handed her a flyer. "The Winter Showcase," he said, his voice casual, though his eyes were not. "Students performing original compositions. Consider it." May stared at the paper, her heart racing so fast she felt lightheaded. Performing. In public. The mere thought sent her hands trembling. She folded the flyer carefully and tucked it away, neither agreeing nor refusing. That night, she dreamed of a vast auditorium filled with shadowy figures, their faces turned expectantly toward a spotlight where a grand piano waited. She woke gasping, sheets twisted around her legs. Throughout October, she composed furiously, starting pieces, abandoning them, returning to rework them again and again. Nothing felt right. Nothing seemed worthy of being played where others could hear. Mr. Cato never mentioned the showcase again, but sometimes she would catch him watching her with a patient expression that made her both grateful and guilty. In early November, as the first frost painted the school grounds in silver, everything changed. May came downstairs for breakfast to find her parents sitting together at the kitchen table, an unusual sight on a weekday morning. Her father looked up from his coffee with an expression she rarely saw, satisfaction. "I've accepted a position at Georgetown," he announced without preamble. "Chair of the economics department. We'll be moving during winter break." The world tilted sideways. May gripped the back of a kitchen chair, feeling suddenly unsteady. "Your mother has already researched the school districts," he continued. "Phillips Academy is highly ranked nationally. Their graduates routinely enter Ivy League universities." Her mother nodded, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I've found several lovely homes online. We'll fly out next weekend to look at them." "This is an excellent opportunity for all of us," her father concluded, his tone making clear that no discussion was expected or welcome. May sat down, legs suddenly too weak to support her. "When?" she managed to ask. "December 20th. The movers are already booked." Her father returned to his newspaper. "You'll have time to say goodbye to your friends before the holidays." Friends? As if she had many. As if that was what mattered. Her mind raced to Mr. Cato, to room 103, to the upright piano with its warm voice and worn keys, to the hours spent finding herself in music, to the compositions hidden in her desk drawer at home. What about my piano lessons? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Her father lowered his newspaper, eyebrows rising in mild surprise. "I'm sure Georgetown has excellent music teachers if you wish to continue. It would still look good on college applications, especially if you advance to more challenging repertoire." College applications. Always college applications. Never the music itself, never what it meant to her. The next day, May arrived at the music room earlier than usual, a folder clutched tightly against her chest. Mr. Cato was arranging chairs for the afternoon band practice. "I'm moving," she said, the words falling from her lips like stones. "December." Mr. Cato set down the chair he was holding. For a long moment he said nothing, just nodded in that way of his that acknowledged difficulty without trying to diminish it. "Georgetown," she added, surprising herself with a second voluntary sentence. "My father's job." "I see." Mr. Cato's voice was gentle. "And the piano?" "He says," May swallowed hard. "He says I can find another teacher there. But not another room 103. Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, focusing on the folder in her hands. With careful movements, she placed it on the desk between them. "My compositions," she whispered, "for the showcase. I won't be here, but maybe someone else could play them." Mr. Cato opened the folder, scanning the neatly written sheets of music with their precise notations and carefully marked dynamics. His expression softened. "These should be played by the person who created them, May." He closed the folder and returned it to her hands, placing his own briefly over hers. "Music is patience. It waits for the right moment, the right performer. Take them with you. Their time will come." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and logistics. May visited room 103 every day, playing for as long as she could, trying to memorize the feeling of those particular keys under her fingers, the specific resonance of that space. On her last day before winter break, she arrived to find Mr. Cato waiting with a small wrapped package. "For the journey," he said, pressing it into her hands. Later, alone in her increasingly empty bedroom, Mai unwrapped it to find a blank music composition book. Its pages thick and high quality, its binding designed to lay flat on a piano stand. On the first page, Mr. Cato had written only, "The music moves with you." 2 weeks later, May stood in the doorway of her new bedroom in a house that smelled of fresh paint and strangers. Outside the window, Georgetown's winter wrapped the unfamiliar neighborhood in a thin layer of snow that muffled every sound. The moving company had delivered her bed, her desk, her bookshelves. The boxes of clothes and books waited to be unpacked. Everything was there except the thing that mattered most: a piano, a room of her own, a space where music could speak when words failed. Her father appeared in the hallway, his expression distracted as always. "The school principal expects you Monday morning at 8 for orientation," he said. "Your mother pressed your new uniform. Don't be late." He paused, then added with what he clearly thought was generosity, "We'll look into piano lessons after you've settled in academically." May nodded automatically, the obedient daughter once again. But inside, where no one could see, something had changed. The music hadn't gone silent. It had gone underground, flowing like a river beneath ice, waiting for the thaw that would bring it surging back to the surface. As she began unpacking her clothes, her fingers moved with the rhythms of a composition taking shape in her mind, one she couldn't yet play but could already feel. A piece about endings and beginnings, about voices lost and found, about the girl who remained quiet while her soul learned to scream. Phillips Academy loomed like a fortress against the January sky, all red brick and ivy and windows that reflected the winter sun with cold brilliance. May stood at the iron gates, clutching her new leather backpack, a gift from her father to mark this prestigious new chapter in her education. The uniform felt stiff and foreign against her skin. Navy blazer, crisp white shirt, plaid skirt that fell exactly 2 inches below the knee per school regulations. Her mother had spent the previous evening ensuring every detail was perfect, her anxious hands smoothing non-existent wrinkles, adjusting the collar until May wanted to scream. "Remember, first impressions matter," her father had said over breakfast. "The connections you make at Phillips will serve you throughout your academic career." Now, watching students stream past in identical uniforms, their voices loud with the confidence of belonging, May fought the urge to turn and run. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped through the gates, keeping her eyes fixed on the stone path beneath her feet. The orientation passed in a blur of administrative offices, class schedules, and carefully rehearsed welcoming speeches. Phillips prided itself on tradition and excellence, words repeated so often they lost all meaning by midday. May nodded at appropriate intervals, signed required forms, and spoke only when directly addressed. Her new teachers seemed impressed by the transcript from her previous school, making comments about her academic promise as if she weren't standing right there. Her classmates maintained polite distance, that particular brand of East Coast reserve that masqueraded as good manners, while serving as effective armor against outsiders. By lunchtime, May had learned the most important lesson Phillips had to offer. She was even more invisible here than she had been at home. The dining hall buzzed with the controlled chaos of adolescent social hierarchies. May found a seat at the end of a long table, far enough from others to avoid conversation but not so isolated as to draw attention. She ate methodically, focusing on the taste of each bite, the texture, the temperature, anything to anchor herself in the moment rather than drowning in the vastness of starting over. "You're in my AP Chem class, right?" "New girl?" May looked up to find a tall girl with short dark hair and rectangular glasses standing across from her, lunch tray in hand. "I'm Nora," the girl continued without waiting for a response. "Mind if I sit? The lacrosse team has colonized my usual spot, and I refuse to listen to them relive yesterday's practice on principle." Before May could respond, Nora slid into the seat opposite, arranging her lunch with quick, efficient movements. "So, mid-year transfer? That's rough. Where are you from?" "Westridge," May said quietly, the name of her old town feeling suddenly precious. "Never heard of it." "Big city, small town, alien spacecraft?" The unexpected humor startled a small smile from May. "Small town," she answered. "Well, welcome to Phillips, where the pressure is high and the fun is—" Nora pretended to search for something. "Actually, I've been looking for the fun since freshman year. If you find it, let me know." That afternoon, as May navigated the maze of hallways between classes, she found herself listening for music. At her old school, sound had traveled from the band room throughout the day. Trumpets practicing scales, drums keeping unsteady rhythm, the occasional perfect phrase floating from the choir room. Here, the hallways echoed with footsteps and carefully modulated conversation, as if the building itself disapproved of excessive noise. During her campus tour, she'd glimpsed a music wing with practice rooms and what appeared to be high-end equipment. But without an assigned music class, her father had insisted she focus on academic subjects this semester. She had no legitimate reason to be there. Days stretched into weeks. May established a new routine. Wake early to review notes. Endure classes where she was simultaneously invisible and scrutinized. Complete homework with mechanical precision. Repeat. At dinner each night, her father interrogated her about classes and assignments, while her mother watched with tense smiles, as if May's academic success were a tightrope they all walked together. The only break in the monotony was Nora, who had appointed herself May's unofficial guide to Phillips Academy. Unlike the friendship with Daphne that had begun to bloom back home, this connection was based not on May speaking more, but on Nora requiring less. She seemed perfectly content to carry conversations by herself, pausing occasionally to allow May space to respond, but never pressuring her when words failed. It was Nora who first noticed the signs of strain. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said bluntly one February morning, sliding into their usual lunch spot. "And you're losing weight. Are you sick or just slowly disintegrating under Phillips's academic death march?" May poked at her untouched salad. The truth was she hadn't been sleeping. At night, music filled her head, compositions taking shape with no outlet, melodies building and colliding like waves with nowhere to break. During the day, her fingers twitched constantly, phantom keys beneath them, playing pieces that existed only in her mind. "I'm fine," she whispered, the lie tasting bitter. Nora's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "Right, and I'm secretly a duchess in exile." She leaned forward. "Look, whatever it is, homesickness, anxiety, existential dread, it helps to talk. Or, do something other than work and sleep. I used to play piano," May said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "At my old school." Nora's expression softened. "There are practice rooms in the arts building. You need to be enrolled in music classes to get regular access, but it's fine," May interrupted. "I don't have time anyway." That night she dreamed of room 103, dust motes dancing in sunlight, the familiar weight of piano keys beneath her fingers, Mr. Cato's quiet presence as she played. She woke with tears on her face and the echo of music fading like morning mist. The following weeks brought midterm exams and with them, increased pressure from her father. Every evening became a recitation of expectations. Not just A's but the highest grades in each class. Not just participation but leadership. Not just success, but perfection. College applications were still months away, but in the Chen household they loomed like an approaching storm. Discussion of them dominating every conversation. Yale has shown interest in my research, her father mentioned casually over dinner one night. Their economics department is unparalleled. The unspoken expectation hung heavy in the air. May nodded, pushing rice around her plate. No longer hungry. Later that evening, as she struggled through calculus problems that refused to resolve, her mother appeared at her bedroom door with a cup of tea. "Your father means well," she said softly, placing the steaming cup on May's desk. "He only wants what's best for you." What's best for me or what looks best to others? May thought but didn't say. Instead, she nodded again, the motion becoming as automatic as breathing. Her mother hesitated, one hand lightly touching May's shoulder. "You used to play piano," she said, surprising May. "At your old school. Your teacher sent a letter of recommendation for music programs. Your father set it aside, but She paused. "I read it. He said you have exceptional talent." May stared at her mother, unable to form words. "Do you miss it? Playing?" The question, so simple, so direct, broke something loose inside May's chest. She nodded. A single sharp movement, eyes suddenly burning. Her mother squeezed her shoulder once, then slipped away without another word. By March, the pressure had become nearly unbearable. May's grades remained perfect, but the cost was steep. Sleepless nights, skipped meals, a constant tremor in her hands. The music in her head had become a torment, compositions building and building with no release. The breaking point came during advanced English literature. They were discussing The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, a story about a woman slowly losing her grip on reality while confined and silenced. The protagonist's madness can be interpreted as rebellion against patriarchal constraints, the teacher was saying. Her inability to express herself through writing leads to expression through increasingly erratic behavior. Something in May's chest tightened painfully. The classroom suddenly felt too warm, the air too thin. "Chen, do you have thoughts on the symbolism of the wallpaper pattern?" All eyes turned to her. May opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. The pressure behind her ribs expanded, crushing her lungs, her heart, her ability to think. The silence stretched, became unbearable. She began, then stopped as black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Take a moment," the teacher said, her voice seeming to come from very far away. Deep breaths, but May couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. Couldn't stay in this room 1 second longer. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor with a sound like a scream, and fled. She ran blindly through empty hallways, her footsteps echoing against marble floors. Without conscious decision, she found herself pushing through heavy doors into the school auditorium, a vast space used for assemblies and performances, empty now in the middle of the afternoon. The stage loomed ahead, and on it, gleaming under soft emergency lights, stood a grand piano. May moved toward it as if in a dream, her feet carrying her up the side steps and across the polished wooden stage. The piano waited, its lid closed, its bench perfectly aligned. Her hands shook as she lifted the cover, revealing keys that glowed ivory and ebony in the dim light. She sat, adjusting the bench by instinct, and placed her trembling fingers on the cool keys. For a moment, she didn't move, just felt the instrument beneath her hands. Alive, waiting, patient. Then, without thinking, without planning, she began to play. The music that poured from her fingers wasn't Bach or Chopin or any of the classical pieces she'd studied. It wasn't even one of the compositions she'd carefully crafted in room 103. This was something new, raw, untamed, built from months of silence and years of holding her voice inside. It started softly, hesitantly, like the first raindrops before a storm. Then it built, gaining strength and speed, crashing through the empty auditorium in waves of sound that seemed to come not just from the piano but from May herself. Every note was a word she hadn't spoken, every chord a feeling she'd suppressed, every crescendo a scream finally set free. She played until her fingers ached, until sweat dampened her uniform shirt, until tears blurred her vision and fell unchecked onto the keys. She played until everything inside her had been poured out through her hands, transformed from pain into beauty, from silence into sound. As the final notes faded, May became aware of two things simultaneously: the profound quiet that followed her storm of music, and the fact that she was not alone. A figure stood in the shadows at the back of the auditorium, the school's music director, Professor Wheeler, holding what appeared to be a small recording device. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward into the light. "I heard the music from my office. I've never—" She paused, seeming to search for words. "That was extraordinary. Who taught you to play like that?" May stared at her, suddenly conscious of her tear-stained face, her rumpled uniform, the fact that she was missing class. "I need to call your parents," Professor Wheeler continued, approaching the stage. "Not because you're in trouble," she added quickly, seeing May's expression. "Because they need to know what you can do. What you just played, that wasn't just skill. That was something rare." She held up the small device. "I hope you don't mind that I recorded some of it. Sometimes in moments like this, it helps to have proof." May looked at the piano, then back at the professor, feeling strangely calm after the storm of emotion. "May I play it again?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "From the beginning this time. I think I can make it better." The Chen family dining room had never felt so small. May sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, watching her father's face as Professor Wheeler's voice filled the silence. "What your daughter played wasn't just technically impressive," the music director was saying, her tablet propped up on the table between them. "It was emotionally profound. The composition itself shows remarkable intuition about musical structure." On the screen, a video played. May at the grand piano, her uniform rumpled, her face tear-streaked but somehow transformed. The sound quality wasn't perfect, captured on Professor Wheeler's phone from the back of the auditorium, but even so, the music filled the room with undeniable power. "In 20 years of teaching, I've encountered perhaps 3 students with this level of natural ability," Professor Wheeler continued. "May has a rare gift." Her father's expression remained unreadable, his eyes fixed on the tablet screen. Her mother sat beside him, one hand covering her mouth, eyes glistening with unshed tears. When the final notes of the recording faded, the silence felt heavy enough to touch. May waited, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her father cleared his throat. "This is what you've been doing instead of focusing on your studies?" His voice was quiet, controlled. Professor Wheeler leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Chen, your daughter is maintaining perfect grades while clearly struggling with significant emotional stress. Music isn't a distraction from her education. It appears to be essential to her well-being." "I've never had formal training," May said softly, surprising everyone, including herself. "Just a few months with Mr. Cato at my old school." Her father's eyebrows rose slightly at the sound of her voice, as if he'd forgotten what it sounded like. "Phillips has an exceptional music program," Professor Wheeler pressed on. "I'd like to offer May private instruction and a place in our advanced composition seminar. These opportunities are normally reserved for juniors and seniors, but in this case, no." The word fell like a stone into still water. May's father stood, straightening his jacket with a practiced gesture. "My daughter's focus must remain on academic subjects that will secure her future. Music is a hobby, not a career path. We appreciate your time, Professor, but May will not be joining your program." May stared at her hands, something cold and heavy settling in her stomach. Of course, nothing had changed. Nothing would change. "Dad." The word slipped out before she could stop it. He turned to her, surprise flickering across his features at the interruption. "Please." She raised her eyes to meet his, fighting against 16 years of learned silence. "Just listen. Not to Professor Wheeler, not to Mom, to me." The room went very still. Her mother's hand reached for her father's, a small gesture of support that May had rarely witnessed. "This isn't about college applications or career paths," May continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "It's about being able to breathe. When I play, I can breathe." Her father's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "May, you've never heard me," she interrupted, the words tumbling out now, unstoppable. "Not really, but you heard that." She pointed to the tablet. "That's my voice." "That's what I've been trying to say all these years." Her father sat back down slowly, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. The silence stretched between them, not empty now but full of unspoken history, of years of expectations and quiet rebellion. Finally, he spoke. "You composed this piece yourself?" May nodded. "It's remarkable," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him something. "But life requires practicality, May. Talent isn't always enough." "I'm not asking to abandon my studies," she said. "I'm asking for balance, for the chance to develop both sides of myself." Professor Wheeler, who had been watching this exchange with careful attention, gently slid a brochure across the table. "Yale has one of the finest music programs in the country," she said quietly. "Many of their music students double major in other fields. Excellence in music demonstrates discipline, creativity, and emotional intelligence, qualities highly valued by elite universities." At the mention of Yale, her father's attention sharpened. May almost smiled, recognizing the strategic brilliance of Professor Wheeler's approach. "We would need to see evidence that this wouldn't impact her academic standing," her father said, his tone shifting from dismissal to negotiation. "Of course," Professor Wheeler agreed smoothly. "Perhaps a trial period? 6 weeks of lessons and composition seminars with regular grade reviews?" As they hammered out details, May caught her mother's eye across the table. A silent message passed between them, understanding, perhaps even pride. The following Monday, May entered Phillips's music wing for the first time, clutching the access card Professor Wheeler had given her. The practice rooms lined a long corridor, each containing a piano better than any she had played before. Room 12 had been assigned as hers, for 1 hour each day during study hall and 2 hours after classes. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The space was small but perfect. Soundproofed walls, adjustable lighting, a baby grand piano that gleamed under the soft lights. May ran her fingers lightly over the keys, testing their weight and response. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the blank composition book Mr. Cato had given her, its first pages now filled with the piece she had played in the auditorium, notated, refined, and titled simply, "Breaking Point." For the next 6 weeks, May lived in 2 worlds. During the day, she maintained her perfect grades, speaking more in classes but still measuring her words carefully. Afternoons and weekends belonged to music, lessons with Professor Wheeler, composition seminars with seniors who initially viewed her with skepticism that quickly turned to respect, and hours alone in room 12 where she built a new language note by note. Her father received weekly progress reports, his concerns gradually easing as her academic performance remained stellar. Her mother began asking about her compositions, listening with genuine interest as May struggled to describe in words what made more sense in music. Even Nora noticed the change. "You're different," she said one lunch period, studying May over her sandwich. "Less like you're about to shatter into a million pieces. The music thing is working, huh?" May nodded, smiling slightly. "It helps." "I want to hear you play sometime," Nora said. "If that wouldn't be too weird." It was the first time anyone her age had expressed interest in her music. "I'd like that," May replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As the 6-week trial period neared its end, Professor Wheeler approached May after a particularly intense composition session. "The spring showcase is next month," she said, straightening sheet music on the piano. "I'd like you to perform." May's hand stilled on the keys. "Perform? In front of people?" "That's generally how showcases work, yes." Professor Wheeler smiled. "Your piece Breaking Point is ready, and I think you are too." That evening, May discussed it with her parents over dinner. A real discussion, with her father listening more than speaking, her mother offering quiet encouragement. "Will you be nervous playing for an audience?" her father asked, his question reflecting concern rather than doubt. May considered this. "Yes," she answered honestly. "But not in the way I used to be. When I play, it's like the audience disappears. It's just me and the music." Something like understanding crossed his face. "I felt that way once, giving lectures on economic theory. Complete focus, nothing else existing in that moment. It was the first real connection they'd shared in years, perhaps ever. May held it carefully, like a fragile, precious thing. The night of the showcase arrived with unexpected speed. Backstage, May peeked through the curtains at the auditorium, now filled with parents, faculty, and students. Her parents sat in the third row, her father rigid in his good suit, her mother clutching the program so tightly it crumpled between her fingers. Professor Wheeler appeared beside her. 5 minutes, she said, giving May's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Remember what we discussed? It's just you and the piano. Everything else falls away. When her name was called, May walked onto the stage with measured steps, the spotlight warming her skin. She sat at the grand piano, the same one where her breakdown had occurred months earlier, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she was paralyzed, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing against her. Then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece started softly, hesitantly, just as it had that first day. But now each note was deliberate, each phrase shaped with intention. What had been raw emotion was now refined expression, still honest, still powerful, but controlled, directed, purposeful. As she played, images flashed behind her closed eyelids. Mr. Cato's gentle guidance, room 103 with its dust motes dancing. In sunlight, her mother's hand on her shoulder, her father's face as he truly listened for the first time. Professor Wheeler's belief, Nora's friendship, all the silent years and the breaking point that had led her here. The final chords resonated through the auditorium, hanging in the air like a question answered. When May opened her eyes, the silence that greeted her was complete, perfect, a held breath before the storm. Then came the applause, building like a wave until it crashed over her, around her, through her. Through. She rose, legs shaking slightly, and faced the audience. Hundreds of faces looked back at her, some with tears streaming openly, others with expressions of wonder. In the third row, her father stood, his usual reserve cracking as he applauded, pride evident even across the distance between them. Beside him, her mother wiped tears from her cheeks without shame. Mei Chen, the girl who had remained quiet all her life, took a deep bow, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. She hadn't spoken a word, yet everyone in the auditorium had heard her voice clear and strong and unmistakably hers at last.